Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. Well, welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. I'm joined today by Emily Ritchie. Emily's been on the show before. She is the executive director for the Northwest Cider Association. So, Emily, I don't know who convinced you and pushed you into coming back a second time, but I thank them and welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
So we talked, I think in 2021 is when I was kind of going back through the archives there. Wow. Yeah, it was a while. And, I can't believe you don't remember every conversation we had. But anyway, I kid. One of the things that I wanted to ask you before we jump into kind of like what the bulk of the topic is approximately at that time, there was about 70 cider makers in Washington State at that time. Mm-hmm. Putting you on the spot, you didn't know this was coming. As of today in June of 2023, approximately how many cider makers are in Washington State now?
That's a good question. It's hard to count because there's no license that just goes for cider. Like you can get a winery license, you get a brewery license, a distiller's license. What do you get for cider? You get a winery license. Right. And so if I go to the Washington Liquor Board and I want to know how many cideries there are, I have to dig through a list of wineries, basically.
Right.
And so I would say there's probably about 70 to 80. There's definitely more folks starting cideries.
Okay.
And more other alcohol producers, wineries, breweries, distillers getting into cider because they see the category growth. The right. Last year, cider in Washington State, locally made cider, has grown 30%. So lots of folks are seeing that and thinking, oh, I'd like to ferment some apples also.
So you're saying that in the last year, cider growth in Washington State's 30% of locally produced in Washington State cider.
That's what I'm saying. It's a big number.
This episode's going to kill me because, we're all about Washington State, but you and I are going to actually talk about some things that are happening in Oregon. I kid. But as far as your organization goes, if we expand that out to your whole organization's area, what sort of numbers are we looking at for cider growth?
Oh, for sales, in Oregon and Washington, it's both about 30% increase.
Okay.
And then you get to Idaho and Montana, the numbers shift a little bit. Idaho has actually been faster growth, but it started as a smaller number.
Right.
So yeah, we're seeing sales of locally made cider really catapult the last year. Okay. And folks are coming out of the pandemic a lot stronger. I'm not saying that means profit is there,
no,
but sales growth is really strong.
All right. So to kind of go back to where we started in 21 and catch us up to today, what other trends have you noticed post-pandemic in cider?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm seeing a lot of imperial ciders hitting the market, which is accounting for a lot of that growth.
Can I interrupt you and ask you to define what an imperial cider is?
What the heck does imperial mean? I think the term kind of stems from the beer world, an imperial pale ale. What the heck is an imperial cider? Usually the way I use it, it means a higher alcohol. So over 8% or so. Cider is usually, 5 to 7.5% based on how apples ferment. How much sugar is in the apple for the yeast to eat and make cider. But then you can play with that. You can add other sugars, whether it's white sugar or honey or something to bump the alcohol content. And people seem to be very excited about that. And that is selling like hotcakes.
I will say that my current go-to cider is an imperial cider. So it's like, not because of the higher alcohol content. It just happens to have that.
Okay. And why is that for you? Is that the flavor you like?
I like, I tend to, I'm one of those, I enjoy ciders, but I do tend to skew towards the sweeter ciders. I don't appreciate the drier ciders as much. And so this imperial cider that I like is a little on the sweeter side.
I
And
see. Yeah. So
and so it's
what
got kind of it's a hot day in Wenatchee. I'll crack a cider instead of, cracking a cold beer. I crack a cider, and it's that same sort of refreshment to me, where I don't find dry ciders to be as refreshing for some reason. That's just my palate. I
Yeah,
know
sure.
that.
Well, for those of us who do like dry ciders also, I'm also seeing a lot more single varietal ciders on the
Mm-hmm.
market, which means people are fermenting just one apple type.
Right.
And it's really fascinating to see what apple varieties come out with a beautiful, well-rounded drink of choice. It's
Right.
really fun because you get really nerdy about the apple types.
Right. And I try those, and I enjoy them, and I enjoy them to, like, in sampling, like, oh, this is interesting. Would I make it my go-to to have a beverage? No, but testing wise, tasting, and because it's all about it's all about research, right? This is all just research.
It's all just research.
Just
Yeah.
research driven. All right. So you're noticing imperials, you're noticing some single varietals. Let's go negative for a second. And by negative, I mean, are you noticing any trends that have stopped? Like, have we moved away from things?
Oh, sure. I'm kind of sad about hopped ciders, actually. I'm definitely seeing fewer and fewer hopped ciders on the market. And I think because it's kind of a confusing concept, usually when we see hops in a beverage, it's beer and
Right.
it's going to be bitter because hops are cooked.
Mm-hmm.
But hops are flowers, and cideries don't cook cider. You make it like wine. You have juice and you add yeast and it ferments just at a cool temperature.
Right.
And so when you add hops to that cool temperature ferment process or post ferment, the characteristics that come out of hop can be really floral or citrusy or fruity.
Mm-hmm.
And so often when I taste a hop cider, it will be like a Sauvignon Blanc or like a fruitier white wine in that way. And it's funny, it just doesn't sell well. And so I see less and less of that on the market, which,
Okay.
I think is kind of a sad loss, but we'll find other wonderful flavors that people like to buy.
Now, when I think of cider, and to me, the 800-pound apple is the apple, but there's obviously berries, and we're making ciders with other fruits and all of that. Are you noticing any other areas of growth? I mean, are you seeing berries increasing? Are they holding their own?
I am seeing berries increase, but it's starting at a really small number, so any kind of increase is also really small.
Right.
Mostly because pear trees grow very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
The phrase is you plant pears for your heirs. Usually
Okay.
you need like a generation for a pear tree to mature.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone's planting peri pears, which are varieties of pears that are intended for fermentation, not necessarily eating.
Mm-hmm.
And so there'll be when they're ripe, they're these hard little disgusting creatures that you probably want to just throw at your friends in the street. And you definitely don't want to bite into them because they're so tannic. You bite into it and it's like biting into a totally green banana.
Right.
And you just want to spit that out. That makes a damn good peri.
Mm-hmm.
And those trees are going to be a while before we have very many in the ground and actually mature enough to produce pears to make beautiful peri in the Pacific Northwest. Okay. So I am seeing a little bit more of that on the market. And people are finding, wild seedlings. A lot of folks plant pears to pollinate their orchards. And so maybe they planted ones that actually aren't very good for eating, but they're great for fermenting. People are aware of that and they're finding those and they're making a little bit more peri. And peri makes this beautiful floral, fruity drink that for those of us who love to nerd out about what they drink, peri is pretty awesome.
Right. All right. The last question, looking forward and to the present. What have you noticed? And this may be a little off I'm noticing more ciders in cans,
Oh,
less
sure.
less ciders in glass, more ciders
Mhm.
in cans. I think a lot of the reasons for that is, portability, weight
Mhm.
for shipping, things like that. But I seem to remember now, and now I'm going to state this while we're recording, and I may be completely wrong, and you will correct me. Nice, politely, kindly. You
Sure.
don't
I
want
always do
you don't
that.
want me to cry. Um, but I seem to remember that cider and cans, cider and can didn't go real well together. There was it impacted the flavor of the cider, and I think there's been some advancements in can technology, if you will.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You remember correctly. Early on, when cider was going into cans, can liners had really been developed and specialized for beer, which is a lower acidity. The
Mm-hmm.
pH is different on beer compared to cider. And so folks were finding when they put a higher acid beverage in a can, it was kind of melting the liner and it was making a terrible taste. And it was not good for anyone, whether it was the producer or the drinker. And the canning companies, there are only a few companies in the world who make cans.
Right.
They are very aware of that now, and they have fixed that. And there's a lot of cider in cans now, and it's not melting the liners.
So they've modified the recipe for the liner that will handle a higher pH, so cider's not as impacted. Because the idea of cider in a can, I mean, you can take it floating the river, you can take it hiking, you can pack it back out a lot easier than you can glass.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more convenient to carry around. And if we're being completely transparent, it's a whole lot easier to get a can on the shelf at the grocery store than it is a bottle.
Yeah, and it's a cheaper package type also.
Right.
Buying glass is more expensive. And so the producer can pass that, dollar saving on or whatnot to the drinker. It's definitely a win.
So now that we have caught up with the state of Northwest cider in the last couple of years since we talked.
Yeah, that's the whole summary right there.
That's the whole summary. There's nothing else that's changed in cider. We have covered 100% of it. But that's not completely true. Because I'd like to think that at my urging, and I'm 100% responsible for this, that what used to be called the Portland International Cider Cup has been renamed.
Just for the Washingtonians, we have renamed it. You're welcome.
Thank you. To the Northwest Cider Cup.
Yes, we have renamed it for our 10th annual. Just in time.
Okay, so let's talk Northwest Cider Cup, because that's kind of the big topic for our conversation today.
Yeah, big.
I didn't realize it was the 10th annual, so I'm remiss.
Now you know. Where's the birthday cake, man?
Yeah, the cake's in the mail. I don't know.
It's in the mail. Got lost.
So why don't you walk us through what is going on with the Cider Cup this year?
Yes.
And let's talk all things Northwest Cider.
Yes, Northwest Cider Cup. So yeah, the reason, I'll give you a little background. A decade ago, the reason it was called the Portland International Cider Cup, it was kind of just like a funny little name that a few producers gave to a competition that they created in Portland and hosted in Portland, but it was for cideries in the Pacific Northwest at all times. And the very first winner, I believe, was a Canadian, because our region is Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia. Mm-hmm. And I say our region, it's the Northwest Cider Association.
Right.
And so they threw in the word international there, and it happened to be won by a BC producer. And then the name stuck and it kept going. But the reason those producers got together was they were disappointed by competition systems. There are a lot of competitions out there for beverages that basically give out participation awards. right? You enter, you get a medal or a certificate or a write-up in a magazine or something, and you've basically paid for some media or, some kudos to yourself.
Right.
They were like, when we think competition, we actually want to know if our cider was the best. And we want a competition that's actually going to judge us.
Okay.
And for the association, we took it over a few years later. We saw a huge value in the friendliness of this competition, in raising all ships with the rising tide, right? If we can encourage everyone to make better and better cider every year, then it's good for everyone. The category is stronger, our reputation is stronger. And so we put a lot of emphasis into educating the judges. The judges are always coming from industry in some sense. They're either cider producers, not judging their own cider, but cider producers in the industry, or winemakers, or maybe they work in a tangential industry. They're like coffee judges, cheese judges. There are plenty of what I like to call gatekeepers, whether they're from media and sample a lot of wine or beer regularly, or they're bartenders and are constantly thinking about what drinks they might be, beverage buyers. So they're folks that have a trained palate already. And then we make them sit through another 2 hours of training to really understand the categories we've set up and what to look for when they're looking for exceptional cider. We don't want them to just be searching for like a flaw or like an okay cider. We want to be picking the very best. And every year we get more and more entries. We had almost 300 entries this year, 279.
Wow.
And we're not increasing the number of medals necessarily. And so the competition gets stronger and stronger, and it's harder and harder to win a medal. I think last year it was maybe 24% of the cideries won medals, and this year only 19% of the entrants won medals.
Okay.
So this is not a participation award setup. This is a competition looking for the very best. And all those judges are also writing notes to each product, or to the maker of each product, to say what they thought. And so on the back end, it's really helpful for the makers. They get to hear what a judge thought. They're like, oh, the tannins on this were too strong, or, you said this is a post-fermentation fruit addition, but I didn't taste any fruit, other than the apple. Let's just be clear on what you're telling the drinker what to expect. And so it's really helpful for our cideries to get that feedback. And then also to win medals, it actually means something. It's an absolute honor to be picked out of, some entries have 30 to 50 ciders in them. And we're only going to give 3 medals at most: gold, silver, and bronze.
Okay. So you mentioned categories. So what categories do you currently judge on?
There are a lot, so I'm not going to list all of them, but the basis this year was very different. We just spent a lot of time thinking through how to talk about cider, right? It can be confusing. You walk up to a bar and you're like, I know I want red or white wine, or I know I want, an IPA or a Pilsner. But right now, the language around cider can be really confusing. And sweetness level, as you were saying earlier, is a really great way of being able to explain what you want. I want a dry cider, or I want sweet. I would say the majority of people who walk up to the bar are not like you. They say they want dry. But they don't actually mean that. I used to sell cider and I would give them bone dry with tannins, and they were like, oh, no, that's disgusting. That's not what I wanted. What they're trying to say is, I don't want cloyingly sweet. I don't want that cider that was made with apple juice concentrate and then rehydrated with water, and then they added apple flavor and it tastes like a candy. They're saying, I want something in between, really dry and that.
Right.
And it's hard to explain that. So with categories for competition, we're not going to just say like whether it's dry or sweet. We're getting more nerdy, and we're going beyond that. And hopefully the language we're talking about in this competition will go forth into the community at some point, and people will have a better language. Like with beer and wine, people know so much more. They can order, they can talk about whether they want a Chardonnay that's oaked or unoaked, things like that. And that's way beyond, I just want a white wine.
Right.
So in our style categories, our style guidelines for cider, that's what we've developed. And what we're really focusing in on is the tannins in the cider. So that's that dryness that you get from a green banana. And does it have high tannin, low tannin? And then acid is really important, because if you have let's say high tannin, but it's also sweet, it might be really well balanced. Same with high acid and some sweetness. Again, it's really balanced. But if you just have one of those three things, acid, tannin, sweetness, and then it's not balanced. And that's where people are like, I don't want a sweet cider, right? You don't want it cloying. You want it to be balanced with some acid or some tannin.
Right.
And then we also talk about single varietal ciders. We're judging those. Like there's some apples out there that are made with that are actually red inside.
Yes.
You cut into them and it's incredible. You open that flesh and it's a pink freaking apple. That comes from a lineage of apples from Kazakhstan originally. That's actually where all apples come from.
Okay.
And Wenatchee actually has quite a few red fleshed apples that are grown.
We do. A lot of the growers are bringing that in.
It's so cool. We actually have a category for red fleshed apples.
Yeah. We're noticing when I talk to orchard owners, it's interesting to listen to what they're as they're rotating their trees out, if you will, what they're not bringing in versus what they are bringing in. A lot of the red flesh stuff is coming very popular. The Cosmic Crisp, which is a great eating apple. It's becoming, it's becoming the Red Delicious apple of choice for orchard growers, and then the number escapes me. The new one that WSU just released publicly, 64 or whatever. They've got a new apple out. That's another hybrid that they just launched.
You're more hip to the new apple.
Well, I live in Wenatchee and I talk to orchard. I talk to orchard owners. It's just, but it's interesting because that red flesh thing has become, I don't want to say trendy, but it's becoming more prevalent. Because it creates a good fruit for lots of things. So
for lots of things. And when it's fermented, it usually actually has different apple characteristics than apples with white flesh or whatever you call it, yellow flesh. And you'll get these notes of like maybe cranberry and raspberry and whatnot. So we've actually put those in a separate category. If folks have used red fleshed apples, the cider usually tastes different. So we want to judge like with like. Same with fruits. We try and judge like with like, stone fruits together instead of trying to judge like a cherry cider next to a pineapple cider. Same if it's got botanicals in it or it's spiced. We actually had a new category this year for low alcohol or alcohol removed, because that's definitely a trend we're seeing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then also dessert ciders, like basically fortified. Maybe they're made like the French Pommeau, which is brandy plus apple juice or cider, or vermouths are really fun. I'm seeing more of those. So those were all judged together too.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this year we really went above and beyond in breaking down the categories in a new way, trying to be more clear with our producers about language, and hopefully that will trickle out to the rest of the community. And
Right.
your listeners are the first really to have that language.
Right.
And hopefully, if anyone's coming to the Cider Summit this weekend, it's in Portland. Sorry, it's in Oregon.
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to interrupt you because this will release after that. So
I know it's going to be this weekend,
oh,
the 23rd.
oh, sorry, my bad. Carry on.
I'm with
Ignore
you
me.
schedule. We're actually going to we'll have a booth there where we can taste a high tannin cider next to a low tannin cider. And
That's
you can
very
hang
cool.
out with us. It'll be really fun. We may do it again in Seattle when the Cider Summit goes to Seattle in September as well.
Okay, so I knew I had a conflict on my schedule. Okay, I had to check to see if I could go to Portland.
You have to hold your breath when you come to Portland.
I could. I'll share off mic. I'll share my latest Portland story. It was actually frighteningly funny. So the organization is really working hard to bring language to help the consumer order
Yes.
things that are better fit for their palate, wherever their palate may be at that time. That's lovely because,
yeah.
I mean, I was going to kid you. You said, you order a white or a red. At some places, that's all you get is a white wine or a red wine. It depends on which box it comes out of. But you can go to a wine bar.
Those choices, right? Like with cider, you walk up and they're like, "Do you want a cider?" And no one says, "Do you want a wine?" They at least give you two choices, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But or you can go to a wine bar and have a myriad of choices depending on how nerdy you want to get with your tasting. You can do that at breweries and all that. So it's good that this. All right. So I'm going to ask you this question. You had you had a lot of categories. What was the category with the most entries?
Oh, fruit always is in the Pacific Northwest. Okay. Fruited ciders is always biggest.
That was the biggest one. Mm-hmm. And approximately how many entries in the fruited cider?
Oh, I would have to look at stats that I don't have in front of me, sir.
Okay. More than 5?
Oh, more than 5. Yeah, I would say 30 to 50, something like that.
30 to 50 fruited cider entries.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my best guess.
That's fine. So approximately how many cider makers submitted ciders for judging?
Cideries, I would say close to 150 is my guess.
Wow.
Maybe 100, something like that.
Okay.
And then actual ciders that were entered was 279.
Right. So 207. So basically, if we're oversimplifying this, every cidery submitted two ciders. I mean, that's how you got to the basically. I know I'm way oversimplifying it, but
yeah, it's way oversimplified because some cideries love to put in 30 entries or whatnot. So again, I should have prepared with some numbers for you.
That's okay. No, that's okay. So, but you had 150. We're gonna go with these numbers, folks. It's not necessarily exact, so don't get upset. But 150 different cideries submitted something to be judged, resulting in almost 300 total entries.
Correct.
How long did it take to judge all of these?
1 full day. So we just did the judging June 12th, and we brought in close to 80 judges. These were all incredible volunteers. And they flew in from all over the world. We had a cider maker from England. We had folks represented from New York and Virginia and Vermont. We had Californians came up. Canadians came down. It was a really wonderful, beautiful day, and a great moment for our staff. Our team worked their butts off to be organized enough and get through 300 entries in a day.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So walk me through an example of how a tasting is handled.
Yeah. First of all judging is blind. So there's a back room where a bottle is poured into a glass, and then the judge has no idea what they're getting, because a steward, again, a volunteer, we had something like 13 stewards all volunteering to be the person shepherding the cider from the back room to the judge. So they get this glass in front of them. It's, maybe they get a yellow color or some kind of a fruit tone, like a pink or something, and they have to sample it. They start with aroma, so they smell it, they look at it, and then they taste it. And they're looking to find exceptional qualities. They're looking to find balance. They're also making sure that it's not flawed. You don't want a cider that tastes like baby diaper, for example. It is actually very hard to make cider. It seems very simple. You add yeast, and you from the yeast does the work. But having made cider myself, it is really hard. I am not a cider maker. Mine tasted like armpits. We don't want that to go out into the community. I didn't sell my cider. And so if we catch anything like that, we make sure to tell a producer. Resoundingly, I heard from judges, they were very impressed with the overall caliber, and they were expecting more flaws that they didn't find, which is awesome.
I'm sorry, sir. Your cider tasted like a diaper. That's a Monty Python skit waiting to happen. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you and share a story. We interviewed one of the first interviews we ever did on the show, which was we had a different host, and we went to the cider maker's location. And the question was, well, how did you get started in cider? And he goes, well, I was going to WSU and I couldn't afford alcohol, so I started making my own, and it was awful. And he was just like, because I was fermenting it in my closet. And I was just laughing, I was like, okay, so, but even he didn't describe it in quite the terms that you did. So, all right. So they're checking for aroma, for visual, how it looks. Are we looking for like clarity, like not a lot of sediment? How does one judge the visual characteristics of a cider?
Yeah, well, each category, they're looking for different visuals sometimes. So for example, like a high tannin cider, it might be cloudy, but it usually is clear when it's made in the Northwest. There's not a lot of folks that don't filter their product. Usually it's a certain color you're looking for. If it's got tannins, it will be more of a brown color than a yellow color. Okay. Amber or gold. So they're checking those things. Usually they're not judging them for that. Right. They're just making sure it's aligning with expectations. Okay. But they are judging on flavor and mouthfeel. So if it's a high tannin, there should be this medium to full body mouthfeel. They should feel the tannins in their mouth. There should be, more flavor than if they were drinking. There's more going on in your mouth than if you had the yellow banana, right? Not that it's not that a green banana is actually enjoyable, but that's the only way I can kind of explain.
No, and I think that's a good way of describing mouthfeel. I mean,
yeah. When it's in a drink, it's actually pleasant. Hopefully, if it's balanced. But if they're saying this is a cider made with tannic apples that you bit into, and they're actually not pleasant raw. Usually a tannic apple it's not something you're going to find at the grocery store, because it's not meant for eating. It's meant for fermenting. But when it's made into cider, it's this beautiful, well-rounded drink. And that's usually, we're saying, if you entered it into this category, that's what we're expecting. Right. And we want to make sure we're judging it on that.
Okay. So took all day. I have a question. So how much effort was made to serve the ciders at the best temperature for drinking?
Oh, so much effort. Okay. Yeah, so that's a great question. We actually had to rent a refrigerated truck. So we held the competition at a hotel, and they didn't have a walk-in fridge that could take I think we had 2 pallets worth of boxes full of cider. Right. So we rented a refrigerated truck that sat in the parking lot and was plugged into the hotel, and we shorted their fuse a couple times because they
perfect.
So it was great. But we made it through. But the ciders needed to start cold in some way, but we would take them out of the fridge early enough that they weren't freezing cold, because you can't actually taste flavor if something's too cold.
Right.
It's important to have it closer to room temperature to get all of the flavors and really appreciate it. But again, you don't want it warm. So it is definitely a juggling game, and it's really important to be on with the systems.
All right. The average judge, how many actual beverages were they sampling?
I think we made a rule that they would judge up to 30 in a day.
And how much were you pouring for a sample?
Usually about 2 ounces, but they could say, they need a repour or whatnot. Mm-hmm. But they're highly encouraged to spit, because it's right. Not good to have a drunk judge.
No, it does kind of skew the results a little.
Yeah. Yes. The later in the day would be more exciting.
Did you film this? Is this
Actually, we did. We're making a promo video for next year. So yes, it was filmed.
Okay. Well, yeah, then a drunk judge might, well, anyway. Okay.
No, so everyone was professional. There was
no I kid. I'm curious though, the English judge, because the English ciders that I've had are different than the ciders I've had from the Northwest. What can you share, if anything, about what the English judge had to say?
It's an interesting question, because England has a lot of traditions in cider, and they're also seeing a revival, much like we are. And this particular judge is making cider in a county that didn't necessarily traditionally maintain its cider culture. Cider is very regional in England, and usually they're using tannic cider apples. They're using things like the Kingston Black and the Harry Masters Jersey, and all these apples that we don't often see. We have to go seek out if we're going to find them in the US.
Right.
But he's in a county called Kent, which actually abuts London. It's not in the West Country. It's not Herefordshire or Somerset. Right. And he's making ciders, which to me seem more, I don't know if the word is modern in England versus sticking to traditions. Right. And he said he's using apples that his family orchard has been growing for eating for many years. Okay. And they're apples, again, that we don't see, like the Cox's Orange Pippin. We don't see that very much. But that was actually my grandfather's favorite eating apple. My dad's from England. Okay. And so the flavors, I tried one of his cider, end up being similar to what we're seeing. There's more acid in the cider than tannin.
That's interesting, because I was just curious if there was a I can't remember and I'm not a wine person, but there was a movie made about some French wine competition in the early 70s that was won by a California winery, and it was, scandalous that the Americans could make good wine. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that the British are like that, but I was just curious if there was a degree of, and I don't mean to say anything disparaging about this individual. I've never met this. Might be a lovely person. Probably is a lovely person. Snobbery though, maybe a little pretentiousness.
No, I haven't seen that with the British cider makers. They've been very welcoming when we go over there or they come here.
Mm-hmm.
They're not snobby. They're coming out of a period where cider was just seen as kind of the poor man's drink and a lesser drink. I mean, my dad grew up and it was just something you got drunk on in high school and then you moved on. It was not well regarded. And
Right.
I think they're seeing the organization that's coming out of the US as a good thing for the cider world in general. And they're embracing it.
All right. So can we talk winners?
We can talk winners.
Let's talk winners. How do you want to do this?
I think we should just talk about the best right away. I'm kind of eat your cherry on top first.
Let's do it. So drum roll, please.
Bum-ba-da-bum. Well, you will be really excited because Washington took home the best of show. So a little bit of background before I tell you who that is. Each category gets a gold medal, right? And then every gold is compared to each other. And all of the head judges from the day, each table has a head judge that helps move their category along. They are around a table and sampling all the gold medals. So it's like the gold in fruit, the gold in red flush, the gold in tannin and perry. So it's not like for like in this time, but they're looking for the very best cider of the, I think gold, we had, I don't know, maybe 12 golds, something like that.
Okay. All right.
And these are the expert of the expert judges in the room. They picked
drum roll.
A cider made by Alpenfire Cider in Washington. They're in Port Townsend, Washington, so west of you. It's their red fleshed cider. It's called Glow, and it's made with the Airlie red fleshed apple. It's a single varietal, just one type of apple, and it is gorgeous and beautiful.
Okay, that's very exciting. That's
very exciting.
I've actually had that. I've had that, and it was delicious. So I'm like, that's very cool.
It's amazing you say that because it's dry.
I know, but I like it, and I'm not sure where I got to try it at, but I did. So that's extremely exciting. And all kidding aside, I'm just glad it was Washington. Okay.
Well, you know what? The runner-up in that round, the second place, was also Washington.
Okay.
You're in luck. And from Wenatchee, Yonder Cider took runner-up for their barrel-aged perry. So this is a high tannin perry. And it, again, is a really beautiful drink. They make a very small batch. And rumor has it they may already be sold out because there's so few perries out there.
I have not had that one. That is not a Yonder product that I've been able to try. Okay. Congratulations to Yonder. That's great.
Congratulations.
All right. I have a feeling that third place is going to be out of Washington State, though. Just the way you've set this up. I kid.
It's funny. We don't actually do a third place in the final round. We just pick winner and the runner up.
All right. They're very good. So I do have a question. Did you have a barrel aged category?
Yes. Okay. But I think it's technically called wood oaked.
Wood oaked category. I would like to, can we discuss the wood oaked category, please?
Sure thing. Okay. The wood oaked. I'm going to have to scroll now because we have a lot of winners in front of me. While I'm looking for that, I will also tell you to look out for the best new cidery of the year.
Okay.
Because that is a tie, and one of them is from Washington. Empirical Cider. They're on the west side of the mountains. And they just started in the last year. They're making beautiful cider from some apples they're growing themselves, and some of their trees are still maturing.
Right. And where are they? Where on the west side of the state? That's not a name I've heard of.
I want to say they're near Snohomish. That's a test, though. Someone should Google that and correct me.
Okay.
So wood oaked, first place was actually Bauman Cider in Oregon.
I'm going to bleep that out. You know that. Just kidding.
They barrel aged their cider in mezcal barrels.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Really cool. I haven't tried that one yet.
That's a cool concept though. I could try that. Okay.
It's a pretty good one. Mm-hmm.
All right.
They also incidentally won Best Medium Cidery of the Year.
All right. Please define for the audience, medium. What do you mean? And so what's, I'm guessing small, medium, and large.
Small, medium, and large size wise. Yeah. What's the size of the tanks? How many gallons do they produce in the year? Okay. And I believe, oh gosh, I don't hesitate to give numbers, but it's between something like 10,000 gallons a year and 250,000 gallons a year.
So would I be correct in saying something like Schilling would be in the large?
Schilling would definitely be in the large. Yeah, best large cidery.
Tieton would be in the large.
Tieton, it's possible. They're probably close to it.
I want to say they're doing almost 200,000 gallons a year now.
But are they doing over 250?
Oh, that's true. They might be. I don't know. Okay. So medium, would somebody like Union Hill, or would Union Hill still be small?
I would guess, you'd have to talk to each of these folks, but the majority of cideries are small.
Right.
They're making under 10,000 gallons a year, especially if they have their own farm. I mean, Tieton is an exception because they have 60 acres of cider apples, which is actually the largest in the country.
Really?
I know there's not a lot of people growing a sizable amount of cider fruit.
I would not have.
I know.
If you would have phrased that in the form of, do you want to make a bet? I would have lost that bet.
Yeah, interesting. For apple growers in Wenatchee, they're like 60 acres, whatever. Right.
I mean, apple growers in Yakima in the Central Valley, that's somebody's, kid's backyard that they're playing in.
Right. And Tieton has other things. They have more acres they're growing, but actual fruit intended for tannic cider, specialty fruit, it's 60 acres. And
I had no idea that would be orchard that small. That's really interesting. Okay.
Cideries are generally small, generally very independent, small family farms, and they might be growing 5 to 10 acres of cider fruit.
Very interesting. Okay, so let me ask you this. Once again, you're probably gonna have to scroll if you can answer this one. What was the smallest cidery that submitted something?
Ooh. I don't know that because we don't ask them to tell us how many gallons they make.
Okay.
We just say, are you in the small, medium, or large category? We don't say, are you making 2 gallons a year or 9,000 a year? Right.
And so it's self-regulating, if you will, where you want to categorize yourself. Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
What other categories had, in your opinion, because we're not going to cover them all, but what other categories had notable winners in your opinion?
I would say fruit co-fermented was really fun.
Okay.
So that's where instead of fermenting apple juice and then adding a fruit afterwards, that we call that post-fermentation, and that's a lot of the fruit ciders on the market today. If it's pineapple cider or something, usually you've added pineapple juice after fermentation. But co-ferments are really fun, and we're seeing a lot of that in the natural wine world, where you throw it into the vat, whether they're whole fruits like whole plums with apple juice or plum juice. We're seeing a lot more co-ferments and people having fun. And it's also, I would say, can be trickier because the fruits are going to ferment differently, and it takes a lot of skill to do that well. The winner of our co-fermented category is a newer cidery. They began, I believe, about 1.5 years ago during the pandemic. They're called Victoria Cider Company in Victoria, Canada. And they made a quince cider. And quinces are really interesting fruit. They're really old. A lot of folks, if I say quince, they're like, oh, my grandma used to make quince jam or something.
Right.
Like, you don't see quinces a lot, but they're part of the palm fruit category of apples, pears, quinces. They're all kind of related.
Right.
And if you look at a quince, they come in all shapes and sizes, but they look kind of like a fuzzy apple. They're
Okay.
like a peach does, that kind of fuzz.
Right.
And they're terrible for eating fresh. You can't. I don't think it's possible. I mean, you're not going to die, but it's like it's so tannic and so acidic. That's why grandma makes jam with it.
Right. Right.
And when you cook it, and when you make that jam, it's this gorgeous pink color, even though it starts out yellow like an apple. And so you usually don't see a lot of quince added to cider because it's very, very strong flavor. But when it's added and done well, it's really beautiful. It's got these really great floral, citrusy, fruity notes that I love. Puget Sound cider took second in that, and I believe they're in Renton, so near Seattle. I love their story. It's a husband-wife team, and they own an antique shop, and then also make cider commercially on the side.
I saw something about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they have been winning so many medals. They won so many medals. And last year, I think they started only about 3 years ago, and they won the best new cidery of that year. They're very careful with their fermentations and very specific. And they won our best small cidery of the year this year again. They're incredible. And they took second and third place in the co-ferments. They made a blackberry pear and a wild blue huckleberry. And I'm excited to try them. I haven't tried either of those bottles.
So they won best small. Who won best medium, and who won best large?
Yeah. So Bauman's won the best medium, and they're in Oregon. And best large cidery went to Two Towns Cider House. They're also in Oregon. They're based in Corvallis.
This is obviously rigged.
I would also be remiss to say, when I said the best new cidery tied, we talked about Empirical Orchards, and that's Empirical with a Y, EMPYRICAL.
Right.
But they tied with a cidery that I think had their launch maybe 2 months ago, very new, called Heartland Cider Works in Oregon.
Okay, very cool. Well, so it went smooth, all things considered.
It went very smooth. The judges were very impressed with the caliber. Mm-hmm. Cider makers were incredibly honored by the medals that they got. And I highly recommend folks go to our website, nwcider.com, and check out the whole list, because if you're looking for the next new cider, or like a cool one to check out, or what is actually the best cider out there, and you want to try the Glow made by Alpenfire, and you want the details, it's all on our website. We have a tab at the top for winners this year and past years also. So it's a really fun guide. And I would also say our Northwest Cider Club is going to have winning ciders in it in our last quarter box. So if you can't find, so many of these ciders are kind of esoteric and hard to find, and they sell out quickly, you can order some of them to be shipped to your door. We'll do the collation for you.
Let's talk about your cider club, because last time we talked about it, and it was, and I just don't want to assume that somebody's listened to that episode and listened to this episode, because the cider club's very cool. So what's the backstory? Why did the association get into, and I think I know the answer, but why did the Cider Association get into to create a cider club?
I think you know the answer because you listened to the podcast the last time. Good job.
Yeah, I was there.
So we started the Northwest Cider Club in 2020. In May of 2020 is when the idea came into my head. And so there was the chaos, the shock of March, and I was like, oh my God, the world is ending. And then 2 months later, I was like, well, we're going to do something about it. And that was the time when bottle shops were barely open and bars were closed, and you were like running into the grocery store with 5 minutes and you wanted to get out as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. So funny enough, that time sucked for selling cider. It was really hard for small family businesses to find people to buy their cider, or cider fans wanted to get good cider, but they didn't have access. They couldn't go to the cidery down the street because they were closed.
Right.
So we said, what if we ship it to people's doors? And we realized no one was collating multiple brands of cider together in a box at that time. You could do a cider club, one company at a time.
Right.
But for those of us who like variety, there was nothing there. So we said, we'll do it. Little did we know, it's a freaking lot of work.
Yeah.
It's herding cats. You got to get all these brands in a box, and yeah.
Right.
So we put 6 to 12 bottles in a box for you, or if you double up on a box, you could potentially have 24 math. Yeah. You could have more if you want to double up in a box. And get the cider shipped to your door. It's quarterly. You could order one box. You could be on the subscription, but really it gives you the chance to order not sweet cider. We guarantee it won't be cloying, won't be above 3% or 3 bricks. But it's going to be cider we've picked out that we say is good. It's not flawed. It's beautiful cider. It's coming from the Pacific Northwest, and it's from makers who are part of the association and who play nice with others, and make beautiful, interesting ciders. Each quarter we pick a different theme. And that's why at the end of the year this year, the theme is going to be winners of this competition. So now that we have the results, now it's our task to go track down who still has that product and how do we find it. And can we
you're curating a box of
we're curating. Yes.
Well, because you can't, go to your local Safeway and necessarily find Alpenfire on the shelf. You can't.
No, they barely distribute.
Right. You can't go to your local Safeway and find the vast majority of these products. I'd probably say 80+% you can't find at a Safeway. Probably when I think of my Safeway here in Wenatchee, what do I see? I see Seattle, and no disparagement here. I see
to manage distribution at a large scale, get into a company like Safeway, you've got to be big. So our smallest guys can't do that.
No. And then how do they grow? It's the whole chicken and egg thing. How do you get your cider out? If you make a beautiful product, and this would be any product, right? But we're talking cider. So if you're making these beautiful ciders that if people had the ability to try them would go, I want this versus something else. But if you can't get it in front of people, it's one of the things I'm noticing that the various tap rooms that are starting to expand their cider choices. We're seeing things. It used to be if you went to a bar, if you wanted a cider, you were probably getting Angry Orchard. And you're probably getting it in a bottle. That was probably your choice.
And now Northwest Cider, locally made brands are outselling Angry Orchard here locally by double. We're the only place in the country that's doing that.
Right.
Places in the rest of the country, you're still seeing Angry Orchard first.
Yeah, more and more. More and more. It's becoming easier, but it's still not. What I'm noticing is I'm just arbitrarily saying Safeway, but Safeway, your choices are really, if you're going local, it's Seattle cider, Schilling. Two towns. Yeah.
Incline, maybe.
I don't know that I've noticed Incline, but that doesn't mean
they're not getting that side of the mountains.
I don't know. I just, I'm just thinking those are kind of my choices, and those are all fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, because like I told you, I don't know if this was off record. I've been drinking the Imperial Excelsior from Schilling.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's a very tasty, drink.
And we don't disparage those brands. We love them. Some of those folks are on my board of directors.
Yeah.
Those will go into the boxes also, but
Yeah.
usually we pick varieties that they make that are harder to find because
Right.
we don't want to ship you something that you can easily get at Safeway and not have to pay shipping.
So I love the fact, I think this whole curation, and it does two things. A, I think it helps the cider enthusiast be exposed to things that they're not going to find at their local establishments. It also helps the Northwest Cider Association members get their product in front of enthusiasts that they're not getting it in front of. Mm-hmm. And if I tried Glow and I really liked it, I could reach out to Alpenfire if they had it, product, and order it from them directly. But I wouldn't have necessarily tried that without being able to sample it first. So I think it's a win. I think it's a win for everybody.
Yeah, it's a great win. Other than for our staff who pull their hair out each quarter putting the box together. But they're very patient about it, and it's really fun. Right. And it's, it really is the easiest way of trying a lot of different ciders without a road trip to a lot of these cideries that don't really have distribution. Right. But I would say this summer, if you want a road trip or you're already on a road trip, we do have a map of all our cideries. It's on our website, again, nwcider.com/map. And it's part of the Google platform, and you can create your own, route. If you're like, oh, I'm driving to Port Townsend, I'm going to add Alpenfire to our trip, and you can see where they are.
Right. No, fun. The map is wonderful. So as we wrap this up, what didn't I ask you that I should have?
Gosh, we covered a lot of ground in an hour. I would say, what didn't you ask that you should have? I would say, going to see cideries, I would just talk that up, because going to see the place where cider is made, you usually meet the owners and the people, because these cideries are so small. They really are usually husband-wife team, or father and son or something like that. Maybe they have an orchard, or maybe they're in an urban area. Next time you're in Seattle, go to a tasting room. It is so fun. And cider is really changing quickly. You get more of the story when you're actually there, and you get to try things that you didn't know they were making. Last time I went to Yonder's tap room, for example. Yonder is made in Wenatchee, but they have this cool tap room they share with Balebreaker in Seattle, and it is rad. And I am in the industry. I taste cider all the time. I had tried a lot of their stuff, but when I was at the tap room, there was all sorts of product I never knew they were making, and it was really fun. They were making a pommeau. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you guys do this. So I would really encourage you. It's fun, and you get more of the story, and you really get to, if you're at a farm too, there's something about being on farms. I mean, I'm talking to you in Wenatchee, but I live in the city, and it makes my heart sing. It is just so beautiful. And sitting in an orchard, whether it's this summer or this fall when the apples are ripe, God, it will be good for your soul.
Absolutely. So last time I ended the show a little differently than I do now. So we're going to end on this question. This is the most important question I've asked you all day. It's vitally important.
Drum roll.
Cake or pie, and why?
Oh, pie, 100%. Well, my work answer is you can put apples in it.
Right. Okay.
But no, actually, I love making pie. Okay. There's something about using the fruits that are ripe right now, or not, maybe fruits that I picked and then I froze myself. I'm that kind of food nerd. It is so satisfying and so much tastier. I wanted pie at our wedding, and my husband wanted cake, so we went with cheesecake, which is fine. That was a nice compromise. But pie is my favorite, all-time favorite dessert. All right.
Well, Emily, thank you for playing along with my anti-Washington gags. Now, in all seriousness, the region, the whole Pacific Northwest region, we're really lucky. There's so much to do in Washington, but Oregon too, and in Idaho and British Columbia. We've got all this. We're just really lucky, and I don't know if I think we take it for granted. Not intentionally. I just think I used to live on the west side of the state. I saw Mount Rainier every day, and it's there. And really, no, that's a spectacular thing. And every area has something, not like Mount Rainier, but some iconic thing that you are really lucky to have.
We really are lucky.
And we get great products from this region. There's been, amazing creativity out of the Pacific Northwest. So I'm really thrilled. My specialty is Washington. So, thank you.
It's good to have your own specialty. And I agree. We're very lucky. This area is so beautiful. And, I love road trips because that really opens your eye to that change. And I always love coming home too and being like, oh God, I live in a great place and I just saw an awesome place.
Exactly. So, well, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.